Riksdag. 55. The highest provincial gain was again in Bavaria, 5.1%, though in 3 areas the Nazis failed to gain even 1% of the vote. Overall, the party gained 2.6% of the vote, 810,100 votes. 55. Partially due to the poor results, Hitler decided that Germans needed to know more about his goals. Despite being discouraged by his publisher, he wrote a second book that was discovered and released posthumously as the Zwitzbüch. At this time the SA began a period of deliberate antagonism to the Rote Front by marching into communist strongholds and starting violent altercations. At the end of 1928, party membership was recorded at 130,000. In March 1929, Erich Ludendorff represented the Nazi Party in the presidential elections. He earned 280,000 votes, 1.1%, and was the only candidate to poll fewer than 1 million votes. The battles on the streets grew increasingly violent. After the Rote Front interrupted a speech by Hitler, the SA marched into the streets of Nuremberg and killed 2 bystanders. In a tit-for-tat action, the SA stormed a Rote Front meeting on the 25th of August and days later the Berlin headquarters of the Communist Party of Germany, KPD, itself. In September, Goebbels led his men into Neukölln, a KPD stronghold, and the 2 warring parties exchanged pistol and revolver fire. The German referendum of 1929 was important as it gained the Nazi Party recognition and credibility it had never had before. 56. In the late 1920s, seeing the party's lack of breakthrough into the mainstream, Goebbels proposed that instead of focusing all of their propaganda in major cities where there was competition from the political movements, they should instead begin holding rallies in rural areas where they would be more effective. 54. On the evening of the 14th of January, 1930, at around 10 o'clock, Horst Wessel was fatally shot in the face at point-blank range by 2 members of the KPD in Friedrichshain. 57. The attack occurred after an argument with his landlady, who was a member of the KPD and contacted one of her Rote Front friends, Albert Hochter, who shot Wessel. 58. Wessel had penned a song months before which would become a Nazi anthem as the Horst Wessel lied. Goebbels seized upon the attack, and the weeks Wessel spent on his deathbed, to publicize the song, and the funeral was used as an anti-communist propaganda opportunity for the Nazis. 59. In May, Goebbels was convicted of libeling President Hindenburg and fined 800 marks. The conviction stemmed from a 1929 article by Goebbels in his newspaper Der Angriff. In June, Goebbels was charged with high treason by the prosecutor in Leipzig based on statements Goebbels had made in 1927, but after a 4-month investigation it came to naught. 60. Hitler with Nazi Party members in December 1930. Against this backdrop, Hitler's party gained a significant victory in the Riksdag, obtaining 107 seats, 18.3%, 6,409,600 votes, in the September 1930 federal election. 55. The Nazis thereby became the second largest party in Germany, and as historian Joseph Bendersky notes, they essentially became the dominant political force on the right. 61. An unprecedented amount of money was thrown behind the campaign and political success increased the party's momentum as it recorded over 100,000 new members in the next few months following the election. 62. Well over 1 million pamphlets were reproduced and distributed. 60 trucks were commandeered for use in Berlin alone. In areas where Nazi campaigning was less rigorous, the total share of the vote was as low as 9%. The Great Depression was also a factor in Hitler's electoral success. Against this legal backdrop, The SA began its first major anti-Jewish action on the 13th of October, 1930, when groups of Nazi brown shirts smashed the windows of Jewish-owned stores at Potsdamer Platz. 63. Weimar parties failed to halt Nazis. The Wall Street crash of 1929 heralded worldwide economic disaster. The Nazis and the Communists made great gains at the 1930 federal election. 64. The Nazis and Communists between them secured almost 40% of Reichstag seats, which required the moderate parties to consider negotiations with anti-democrats. 65. The Communists, wrote historian Alan Bullock, openly announced that they would prefer to see the Nazis in power rather than lift a finger to save the Republic. 66. The Weimar political parties failed to stop the Nazi rise. Germany's Weimar political system made it difficult for chancellors to govern with a stable parliamentary majority, and successive chancellors instead relied on the president's emergency powers to govern. 67. In 1931 the Nazi Party altered its strategy to engage in perpetual campaigning across the country, even outside of election time. 54. From 1931 to 1933, the Nazis combined terror tactics with conventional campaigning. Hitler crisscrossed the nation by air, while SA troops paraded in the streets, beat up opponents, and broke up their meetings. 10. Systematic statistical analyses demonstrate that voters responded the way they do in most modern elections, which explains why certain identifiable groups turned to the Nazis and others turned away. 68. A middle-class liberal party strong enough to block the Nazis did not exist. The People's Party and the Democrats suffered severe losses to the Nazis at the polls. The Social Democrats were essentially a conservative trade union party, with ineffectual leadership. The Catholic Centre Party maintained its voting bloc, but was preoccupied with defending its own particular interests and wrote Bullock, through 1932-3, was so far from recognizing the danger of a Nazi dictatorship that it continued to negotiate with the Nazis. The Communists meanwhile were engaging in violent clashes with Nazis on the streets, but Moscow had directed the Communist Party to prioritize destruction of the Social Democrats, seeing Mordanger in them as a rival for the loyalty of the working class. Nevertheless, wrote Bullock, the heaviest responsibility lay with the German right wing, who forsook a true conservatism and made Hitler the partner in a coalition government. 69. Chancellor Franz von Papen, left, with his eventual successor, the Minister of Defense Kurt von Schleicher. Centre Party's Heinrich Brüning was Chancellor from 1930 to 1932. Brüning and Hitler were unable to reach terms of cooperation, but Brüning himself increasingly governed with the support of the President and army over that of the Parliament. 70. The 84-year-old President von Hindenburg, a conservative monarchist, was reluctant to take action to suppress the Nazis, while ambitious Major General Kurt von Schleicher, as minister handling army and navy matters, hoped to harness their support. 71. With Schleicher's backing, and Hitler's stated approval, Hindenburg appointed the Catholic monarchist Franz von Papen to replace Brüning as Chancellor in June 1932. 72. 73. Papen had been activing the resurgence of the Harburg Front. 74. He had fallen out with Centre Party. 75. He hoped ultimately to outmaneuver Hitler. 76. At the July 1932 federal election, the Nazis became the largest party in the Reichstag, yet without a majority. Hitler withdrew support for Papen and demanded the chancellorship. He was refused by Hindenburg. 77. Papen dissolved parliament, and the Nazi vote declined at the November election. 78. In the aftermath of the election, Papen proposed ruling by decree while drafting a new electoral system, with an upper house. Schleicher convinced Hindenburg to sack Papen, and Schleicher himself became Chancellor, promising to form a workable coalition. 79. The aggrieved Papen opened negotiations with Hitler, proposing a Nazi-nationalist coalition. Having nearly outmaneuvered Hitler, only to be trounced by Schleicher, Papen turned his attentions on defeating Schleicher, and concluded an agreement with Hitler. 80. Seizure of control, 1931-1933. On the 10th of March, 1931, with street violence between the Rote Front and SA increasing, breaking all previous barriers and expectations, Prussia reenacted its ban on brown shirts. Days after the ban, some men shot dead two communists in a street fight, which led to a ban being placed on the public speaking of Goebbels, who sidestepped the prohibition by recording speeches and playing them to an audience in his absence. When Hitler's citizenship became a matter of public discussion in 1924, he had a public declaration printed on the 16th of October 1924. The loss of my Austrian citizenship is not painful to me, as I never felt as an Austrian citizen but always as a German only. It was this mentality that made me draw the ultimate conclusion and do military service in the German army. 81. Under the threat of criminal deportation home to Austria, Hitler formally renounced his Austrian citizenship on the 7th of April, 1925, and did not acquire German citizenship until almost 7 years later. Therefore, he was unable to run for public office. 82. Hitler gained German citizenship after being appointed a Free State of Brunswick government official by Dietrich Klaggs, after an earlier attempt by Wilhelm Frick to convey citizenship as a Thuringian police official failed. 83. 84. Ernst Röhm, in charge of the SA, put Wolf Heinrich von Helldorf, a vehement anti-Semite, in charge of Berlin SA. The deaths mounted, with many more on the Rote Front side, and by the end of 1931 the SR had suffered 47 deaths and the Rote Front recorded losses of approximately 80 killed. Street fights and beer hall battles resulting in deaths occurred throughout February and April 1932, all against the backdrop of Adolf Hitler's competition in the presidential election which pitted him against the monumentally popular Hindenburg. In the first round on the 13th of March, Hitler had polled over 11 million votes but was still behind Hindenburg. The second and final round took place on the 10th of April. Hitler, 36.8%, 13,418,547, lost to Paul von Hindenburg, 53.0%, 19,359,983, while the KPD candidate Thalmann gained a meager percentage of pivot, 10.2%, 3,706,759. At this time, the Nazi Party had just over 800,000 members. On the 13th of April, 1932, following the presidential elections, the German government banned the Nazi Party paramilitaries, the SA and the SS, on the basis of the emergency decree for the preservation of state authority. 85. This action was prompted by details uncovered by the Prussian police that indicated the SA was ready for a takeover of power by force after an election of Hitler. The lifting of the ban and staging of new elections were the price Hitler demanded in exchange for his support of a new cabinet. The law was repealed on the 16th of June by Franz von Papen, Chancellor of Germany, as part of his agreement with Hitler. 86. In the federal election of July 1932, the Nazis won 37.3% of the popular vote, 13,745,000 votes, an upswing by 19%, becoming the largest party in the Reichstag, with 230 out of 608 seats. 55. Dwarfed by Hitler's electoral gains, the KPD turned away from legal means and increasingly towards violence. On the assaulting battle in Silesia resulted in the army being dispatched, each shot sending Germany further into a potential civil war. By this time both sides marched into each other's strongholds hoping to spark a rivalry. The attacks continued and reached fever pitch when SA leader Axel Scheffel was assassinated on 1 August. As the Nazi Party was now the largest party in the Reichstag, it was then entitled to select the president of the Reichstag and were able to elect Göring for the post. 87, energized by the success, Hitler asked to be made Chancellor. Hitler was offered the job of Vice-Chancellor by Chancellor Papen at the behest of President Hindenburg, but he refused.